It's come around yet again, another edition of Ask GCN Anything. And this week we're focusing on power. So let's kick things off with this first question from Ed Markey, who asks, what is the difference between overall average power and normalised power? Now, I did know the answer to this because I asked you this a little while ago, so I've kind of forgotten, Dan. Now, you are a bit of an expert on this, so take it away.
Well, I'm not an expert, I just know a little bit more than you do.
Cheers.
So in very basic terms, normalised power gives a much better representation of how hard a ride actually was than average power, because it takes into account all the fluctuations in power that you do. It was developed by Dr. Andy Coggan many years ago now. When you use it in conjunction with your functional threshold power, it allows you to score each ride based on how hard it was. So to give a real world example, if you went out on a ride for 1 hour and you did 2 minutes at 100 watts and then 1 minute at 400 watts and repeated that until the 60 minutes are up, your average power would be 200 watts. But of course, with those hard minutes during the hour, it's much harder than you had to average 200 watts steady state throughout. And normalised power takes that into account. It's effectively a physiological representation of how hard each and every ride was. At the other end of the scale, a steady state ride, such as a 40-kilometre individual time trial, if you've paced that right, your normalised power will be very, very close to what your average power was. And to give you a real world example right now, Training Peaks led a look at the data from Taylor Finney's Paris-Roubaix race on Sunday, which was really interesting. 6-hour race, his average power there was already very impressive, 287 watts. I mean, he is 85 kilograms, but still,
powerful lad, isn't he?
That is a lot of power. However, because of all the attacks over the cobbles and getting into the cobbles in good position and those fluctuations of power that I've just talked about, his normalised power over that 6 hours was 351.
That does give you, well, it just gives you an insight into how brutal that race is and how it kind of like ebbs and flows, the big surges of power on the cobbles and stuff, and it kind of takes that into account, doesn't it? Now, for five, in fact, key metrics in relation to actually analysing your power data, how about checking out this video? We hope you'll find it pretty helpful.
Now, the first of these is normalised power. This was a metric that was devised by Dr. Andy Coggan, and it takes into account power variance through your ride. So the difference between a hill interval session and a longer, steadier ride. Now, what it does is it gives you the most accurate indication of the true physiological cost of your workout.
Yeah, it's much more representative of the real effort that you've put into a ride versus average power, which is simply a numerical average.
Our next question comes in from Swirly R.
Oh, cracking name, isn't it?
It's a small font, so I'm going to have to lean in. I've just begun to use Zwift and noticed that most of their sweet spot workouts are actually over-under reps. Are there any advantages or disadvantages to these compared to traditional 30-minute workouts at 90 to 95% of your functional threshold power?
Yeah, well, hi Swirly. Under-over reps are great training sessions for a few reasons and are regularly used by pros and amateurs alike because they are very, very effective. Now, they're essentially a lactate threshold workout, but with accelerations or surges, which kind of help replicate the real world scenario of riding out on the open road, especially if you're riding in a breakaway, where you're sat on the wheel, riding at around FTP, and then you've got to surge through to the front and ride hard and then swing off again. That in a sportif as well, or simply trying to break away from a group to jump across a gap, for example.
Yeah, as you can imagine, these are also regularly used by riders who specialise in something like the team pursuit, because they're producing an enormous amount of power whilst they're on the front of the four-man team and just a little bit less whilst they're in the wheels behind. Now, the reason that these are so potent is because they don't really include much in the way, or anything in the way of rest, do they? You're training your body to recover whilst it's still going really hard, which is why it's so specific to race scenarios. As ever though, you shouldn't solely do this one single session. It should form part of a well-rounded training program, which also includes endurance and sweet spot and VO2 max and also periodization as well. But there's no doubt they really are potent. If you do it in a well-rounded training program, they will work and make you faster.
Yeah, they'll make you stronger, they'll improve your FTP, they'll improve your max power, but importantly, under-over efforts particularly will help you improve, well, being able to produce repeated hard efforts, which is essentially the very definition of getting fitter, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Indeed. Now, we feature under-over training in this video, as well as 4 other key training sessions to get you race ready. Most races will start and finish with very hard efforts. At the start, when you're trying to get into the breakaway, and at the finish, when you're trying to get a result. So it makes a lot of sense to try and replicate that out on the road in training.
Yeah, and that's what this next session will do for you. So after a small warm-up, you want to go straight into 15 minutes of random efforts. So pick some points that you're going to see on the side of the road or on the road itself that will trigger a certain response. So it might be that every time you see a blue car, you do a 2-minute TT effort, or it might be that every time you see a pedestrian, you do a 10-second sprint. The idea being that you could be doing any kind of effort at any point in that 15 minutes, just as you would do in a race.
What time it is, Dan? It's rapid fire time.
It is.
Count us in.
3, 2, 1.
Here we go. First up is this from Callum Poole. Hi GCN. Thanks for the advice on my last comment, it helped a lot. My question is to do with style. Why do most people wear their sunglasses over their helmet straps? I go for short rides for an hour or less, and I wear my glasses under my helmet straps. Is it to do with taking them off and putting them on, or is it something that the pros do, therefore everybody does it? Cheers lads, and Emma.
I think it's what he said at the end there. I think we look at the pros and what they do, and they often frown upon people that put them inside the straps, because I've done that in the past where I haven't really been concentrating on whether they're outside or inside the straps, and someone said, what are you doing?
I've got a lot of heat on social media and in the comment section for occasionally wearing my the arms underneath the straps.
Yeah.
Like proper heat. So, but yeah, I generally do kind of look towards the pros and make sure I kind of have them like them. But it's a weird one, isn't it?
Maybe there is a reason. If there is, let us know in the comment section down below.
Indeed.
Ad Lecluse says, why do pros put their statistics on Strava? Don't they give away useful information to their competitors? Well, speaking from our point of view, Chris Froome could put all of his data up. It wouldn't help us one jot, would it?
No.
In terms of his competitors, do you think it would help them?
I don't know if it will help them much at all. I think it's I think it's a pretty cool PR exercise, because we know that cycling's been through a bit of a murky past. People are calling for riders, teams to be more transparent. I think it's a healthy thing, just showing how strong they are. And I think there's like kind of a healthy rivalry on Strava as well. I mean, you've been on it a little bit. One of your records still stands for the Tour of Flanders, but I only think it's a good thing. But I also respect the right for riders not to share their data as well, because it's like trade secrets, isn't it? I guess.
Yeah, I was kind of joking before. Obviously, it isn't going to help Matt and I get anywhere near to pro level again. Whether or not it would help someone that is close to being at the top of the Tour de France, I'm not really sure. I mean, you're still doing already what you can do, and just knowing that this is where you've got to get to might not help you all that much. Conversely, in the classics, I don't think you can take too much from the powers there. Anyway, this rapid fire round is quickly
it's turning into
quite an endurance
like
event,
really slow fire round. It doesn't matter.
Douglas Pate, as a 24-year-old, I rode the Paris-Roubaix cyclo-tourist event in 1982. So let's have a think about the technology that existed back then. It was a dry day during the event, at least, no punctures. This is also the least rapid fire question I've ever read out in my life.
I just liked it. It was off the back of our cobbles one
For about 3 days afterwards, my whole skeleton continued vibrating, and yes, there may only be 54 k's of cobbles from the 260 k's, yet it is the cobbles that leaves the physical impact on your body, mainly wrists and shoulders. It was one of the best cycling experiences I ever had. Not even a question.
No.
Just basically read out a statement.
It was but thank you very much for getting in touch, Douglas Pate. Brendan O'Donoghue asked, this is a quick one, what's Matt's monthly kit repair replacement budget? I'm not even answering that. That's just out.
Well, we don't want to go into details, but it has almost sent the entire company under on some of the worst months.
we're on pot noodles at lunchtime. That's all we can afford.
Mark DeVue, what about changing your front ring to a lower one, like a 34, to go on the Hellingen with cobbles?
That's a good idea, isn't it?
Yes, I ride that most of the time anyway now. I've done 50-34. 50-11, as we talked about many times before, is not that far away from 53-11 anyway, and I'd only ever use a 53-2 these days if I was still racing.
I must admit, when we did the cobbles climbs of the week down, I was on a 39. I'm not quite as fit as I used to be. I wished I had a 36 or a 34 on for some of those climbs, I must admit. So I think it's a good way to go. Hessel Glotzbach, is there a trick to stop my water bottles from dropping out of the cages when riding over the cobbles? Because this always happens to me when I ride a race with cobblestones. Happens to a lot of people, doesn't it?
Well, it still happens to the pros, yeah. This is something that John Canning's covered over on GCN Tech on how to adapt your bike for cobbled riding. There's a couple of things you can do. You can either put that gripper tape around your standard cage, or you could invest in some non-carbon metal cage, because then you're able to physically bend them in so they've got a tighter grip on the bottle. But there's not a surefire solution, is there? You can just reduce it. And actually, Matt's bottles are all over the place.
I lost two. Actually, three. Tim Mayo, controversial sock length question, Claxon. Is there a variation on optimal sock length when wearing 3/4 bib short thingies, knickers? I've got given a pair and normal socks plus those over the knee jobbies, plus my hobbit-like short legs makes for a rather silly look in my opinion. What does your head of style, Adam Blythe, say? Now, we tried to get in contact with Adam Blythe. He's out at a cafe somewhere in Monaco, so he didn't get back to us. But what are your thoughts, Dan? Because it is a very good question, isn't it, from a style perspective?
Well, you do find some people with shorter legs deliberately almost have longer socks when they're using knee warmers, almost to create a sort of leg warmer effect, don't you? There's no gap at all.
No, it's just a little gap. I'm a fan of the small gap, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah, that was nice to know, Matt.
Yeah, there we go, finally.
Edward Smith says, #talkback. Hi GCN, this has been annoying me lately, but every time I jump on the train and my left quad gets so tight I can't ride. Then on the road, I can do a solid 90 k's in 3 hours with no issues. Help!
It's a good question. We were discussing this before we came on, having a little bit of think about it. Now, a couple of times when I've used turbo trainers over the years, my turbo trainer used to be in the garage and one of the rubber bungs came off and it meant the turbo trainer actually tilted for a period of time. And I rode it and I got a bit of a knee twinge and I kind of went back to my bike, checked it, and it was because the turbo trainer wasn't out of alignment. So basically the first thing I would do is check that your floor is level, and on many turbos and smart trainers now they have little leg adjusters where you can sort of screw them to adjust the kind of height. Check that. Your bike needs to be basically plumb square, basically, because if it's tilted out and you're riding, especially given hard efforts, your body could be tilted in one way, and there could be discrepancy in the terms of the way you're applying power through. So I think look at how, that's not very rapid, is it? But basically look at how square your bike is.
Should we go for lunch?
Yeah.
I'm hungry.
A little bit exhausted, Dan, after that rapid fire.
Yeah, let's
I think
slow
we just
it
need
down
to
a
knock
bit,
it down a couple of cogs, if you don't mind. Took it out of me, that did. Okay, it's this question from Michael McNaughton. Good day to you. Good day, Michael. I'm getting confused with cadence. I read in here that one should ride at around 80 plus RPM. I ride a 5236 with an 1132 cassette and I ride 700 x 23C wheels. What is the best cadence and why? Pretty good question, actually. A commonly asked question as well, isn't it? Let's face it.
Yeah, cadence is a really tricky one because I don't think there's any hard and fast rules as to what really is the best. So some riders choose to spin a high cadence, some choose to grind a big gear. And it also depends on how much power you're putting out as well, doesn't it? So if you're not putting out much power, the optimal cadence is lower, whereas if you're a track sprinter producing an enormous amount of power, you kind of expect them to grind, wouldn't you, with those huge muscles, but actually they're spinning more than anybody else. You can, of course, work on your cadence. It might not be that the one that you are choosing yourself is the best for you, but it might be. Not a very good answer here. To give you an example, Alexander Kristoff, who's a really good pro rider, he tends to grind a gear, doesn't he? And then Chris Froome famously spins it up. If they try to swap over, it might work for them or it might not.
Yeah, so regardless of the cadence, riders can find their own kind of efficiency which just works for them. But conversely, either end of the spectrum, what you don't want to do, especially if you're relatively new to cycling, you're just getting used to sort of the feeling on a bike, you don't want to be pedaling a really, really low gear because that can put undue stress to your knees and can be a recipe for disaster in terms of knee injuries. And also, what you don't want to do, because it's mechanically inefficient and doesn't look great and can make you a little bit unstable, is to pedal a ridiculously high gear as well. Now, on a climb, you'll naturally, generally pedal a lower cadence. So just find a gear that's comfortable and try and ride at between 70 and 80 RPM. Then naturally on the flat, when you're actually going quicker, you'll pedal a high cadence. But it's kind of trial and error really, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I think you're right though. There is a difference between the climbs on the flat, especially when you're in a group sheltering from the wind. You tend to then naturally spin a bit more, don't you? And respond to the small changes in pace. Anyway, we'll go a bit more in depth on this to find out whether you can improve your cadence.
Broadly speaking then, it seems like cadence is linked to two factors. Firstly, there's power output, whereby the fastest and most powerful riders tend to pedal with faster cadences. And we think it's about an increase of 6 RPM per 100 watts. But, and this is really important, the cadence is as a result of the power and not the other way around.
And then there's the velocity of the bike itself. So what you tend to find is that when you're riding fast on a flat road, almost like we're doing at the moment, you naturally tend to have a higher cadence, somewhere around about 95 RPM. But then if you get up to a steep climb, your natural preferred cadence will drop significantly, something like 70 to 75 RPM, even if you've got adequate gears to pedal faster. And this is probably down to the lower inertia experienced on steep climbs, which yields a different force pattern through the pedal stroke.
Before we get on to the final question actually for this week's Ask GCN, I think a reminder that you should just leave your questions in the comments section below. We'll pick up some more for next week, or if you're away from YouTube and you think of one, put it on social media with the #talkback.
Now, finally, as you just alluded to, the question coming from Mark O'Donnell is this. Is the 60 grams of carbohydrate that the body can digest while cycling, that is regularly referenced, fixed for everybody? Or does it depend on person and the intensity of the ride?
It's a good starting point, let's put it that way. I think you're not going to go too far wrong if you aim for 60 grams per hour when you're doing endurance rides. But of course it is, once again, an individual thing. You'll also see some companies and nutritionists recommending 1 gram per kilogram of body weight per hour. So for us that would be more like 75 grams in an hour. And that makes sense as well, doesn't it? Because a 40 kilo rider, taking things to the extreme, is probably not going to need or even be able to absorb as much carbohydrates and glycogen as a 120 kilogram rider, for example. So you do need to tailor it for you, but you can also train that absorption, can't you? If you're not used to it, you're not going to be able to absorb as much. Yeah,
the more riding that you do, the more fueling you do on the bike, the more efficient you'll become. And it's also worth mentioning as well, it's worth considering upping the carbohydrate intake per hour. If it's a particularly long ride and the intensity is quite high as well, that's when you need to tweak your fueling strategy. Now, an important thing to think about as well is a variety of ways of getting that carbohydrate in your body. So clearly you need to be hydrated, so you need an energy drink with some electrolytes in it as well to really help it being absorbed by the body. And then something like a banana, a gel, some fruitcake, even a sandwich of some sort. So variety is good for the head, and also it helps the body to digest it, because the last thing you want to do, I've been through this myself, is just to use entirely glucose drinks, for example, or just exclusively gels. It is, I can guarantee, a recipe for disaster. And it's also worth experimenting with your fueling strategy when training as well.
This is another thing where we had a real world example a few years back here on GCN. So Cy was with the nutritionist from the Belkin team, which is now Lotto NL Jumbo, and previously was Rabobank, and he was explaining to us that Oscar Freire, 3-time world champion, barely needed to eat anything on a 6-hour race, whereas somebody like Bauke Mollema, who's obviously still racing for Trek Segafredo, needs to eat a hell of a lot so that he doesn't blow up. So it very much is individual. You just need to experiment yourself, find out what you need.
Now, for another exploration of this very subject, high carb versus low carb, watch this.
When your body is burning fat for fuel, it isn't an easy ticket to weight loss either. As appealing as the image is of your stomach gradually reducing inside as you ride along, sadly, it just isn't true. Now, when you're exercising on a low carb diet, your body doesn't just burn the carbs, actually can burn protein as well as fat. And exercising in the so-called fat burning zone means, because you're riding at a far lower intensity, you're actually going to use far less calories.
Well, thanks as ever for all your questions. As Dan mentioned before, get in contact in the comment section below using the hashtag TalkBack, or on social media as well.
Yes, and if you haven't seen the recent video that Matt and Cy did exploring the differences between a mid-range bike and a super bike, why not check that out by clicking down here.